Welcome to Frankly Speaking, the podcast on responsible business from Frank Bold, the European Public Interest law firm. I'm Richard Howitt, and after many years of leading discussion on responsible business issues inside the European Parliament, I host our discussions of the latest developments in corporate sustainability, sustainable finance, business and human rights. Today, what's actually happening from companies in their sustainability reporting? What lessons can we learn from it? Frank Bold has undertaken detailed research on 100 company reports, all large companies operating in high-risk sectors as part of the European Climate Initiative UK of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. This study looks at a cross-section of companies from across Europe. 55 are based in Central and Eastern Europe and covers industries such as finance, energy, textiles, food and beverages, and manufacturing. It's one of the first studies analysing implementation of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and is very timely given current discussions about its future. Joining us to discuss the study are two of the experts from Frank Bold who have worked on it directly. We welcome Research Officer and Legal Expert Lorena Bisignano.
Hello, hi.
And we welcome, to Frankly Speaking, to Sustainability Data Analyst Louis Establet.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for the invitation.
Great. So perhaps Louis first. Before we get into the report, as I often ask my guests, how did you first get into sustainability?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say COVID is the cause for me. Basically, to make it short, I was in Paris. I was in Paris. I remember I was in high school. I was at sustainability in mind as a potential career path. And a bit later in my studies, COVID happened, which redefined priorities for me, if I can say. And I wanted to have, even on a small scale, like a little positive impact in my daily job. So it made me go for it. I kind of changed the field, and now I'm in corporate sustainability since a couple of years.
Well, COVID imposed a huge cost on lots of us, but something good has come out of it. You've got into sustainability, and perhaps not the only one. What about you, Lorena?
Also for me, it was during my studies, was during my Master of Laws. I started to get more and more interested into law and development, and from there it's been a whirlwind going into human rights and sustainable finance and climate law.
And all of the people I know, many of whom will be listening in universities and business schools who've worked for so long to get sustainability mainstreamed in the agenda, they're all very, very happy about those answers. Thank you both. Now, the research focuses on 4 strategic areas: climate transition plans, greenhouse gas emissions accounting, double materiality and sustainability, due diligence and governance. So let's just take those one by one. Let's do sustainability, due diligence and the double materiality. Double materiality is such a important, and the assessment of it, the DMA, is such an important element of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. How have companies been doing, Lorena?
Well, I must say that there have been many improvements since last year, because at least this year with the ESRS, there has been a lot more standardization. And so virtually all companies have carried out a double materiality, and they've been great actually describing the processes, as well as the identification of impacts, risks, and opportunities, providing descriptions about the arrows, especially at the topic or subtopic or subtopic level. While there is still something to improve concerning the quality of this information, overall we can see that the information provided is comparable, that there is more standardization, that it is easy to find, that there is increased readability, and that companies are actually starting to let's say, pay attention to the right things to pay attention to.
And most of the report is sort of anonymized in terms of companies, but you do give case studies, and you talk about the French railway company SNCF and also the German company Puma in the way that they integrate due diligence with materiality assessment. It might sound a technical point, but it's actually crucial, isn't it? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, actually, I think that there is a bit of misconception or maybe little understanding about the interrelation between a double materiality and due diligence, in the sense that the one is really functional to the other. In most cases, what the double materiality is really about is the identification of the main and the salient risks that the company can incur in, which is basically due diligence. Having a better due diligence processes actually enables companies to also gather better information on their business companies, on their business activities, which basically is double materiality. So the double materiality assessment can only benefit from a better due diligence processes, especially because in most cases what we found is that, yes, okay, companies do provide a description of their processes, and they also provide a description of their material topics, but this information is still too little company specific and a bit too broad. Better integration of double materiality with the due diligence, on the other hand, will help companies to really target this information, to focus on high risk areas, to identify their hotspots, as well as simplifying for them the reporting burden, if we can actually call that so.
Yes, these are really striking findings of the research that, compared with last year, and Frank Bold did a survey of reporting last year as well. It's gone from 18 to 85 companies that are reporting on impact. And of course, you can only really understand impact if you understand what's going on in the supply chain. And that's why the link between due diligence and the materiality, double materiality assessment is so important. So that's a great finding, in truth. Now, climate transition plans, Louis, there's a huge debate at the moment. Should companies have them? Should they be required to implement them, or should that obligation be taken away altogether? That's debates going on. I'm not asking you to comment on that. What I'm asking you is, what do you see in terms of how companies are today reporting climate transition plans?
I think they are doing better, and there is an increase in the structured and ambitious commitments we've seen across this research compared to last year, compared to pre-CSRD times, let's say. We can clearly see that we have a majority of companies having targets, basically, of decarbonization. And among these companies, there are a majority of them which present a CTP, a climate transition plan. We assessed the CTPs based on the data points from the ESRS, and we can see that the majority of the companies have CTPs covering emissions of all scopes, disclosing their main levers used in their strategy. They cover the entire decarbonization timeline. So they're just showing that they can do it in a more ambitious way. We have more net zero claims, which are more ambitious than carbon neutrality claims. It's not perfect yet. There are still some alignment to be done. Some ESRS data points are not completely met. We have only a few companies disclosing how they are compliant with 1.5 degrees, as the Paris Agreement sets. We also have a few companies only disclosing of the CTP approval by the management bodies. So it's not perfect yet, but it's much more better. And we can clearly see that there is an increase in the structure, the comparability, and the ambition of the commitments.
Yeah, and I think that point for me about not showing the alignment with 1.5 degrees, if I was to say to companies, what's your challenge for next year, that would be the one on climate transition plans. Lorena, governance is the next theme, and companies often mistake it and they think it's just good corporate governance generally, but it is about sustainability governance. Tell us what you found in your research on that.
Well, the ESRS actually now require that in the consolidated annual report, there is specifically a section that deals with sustainability governance. Now, we have seen that because the ESRS on the structure is really clear, most companies are actually providing this sort of section. The issue is about the kind of information that is there. So mostly what we found is that, okay, yes, companies do include this section, but then they just simply mention that the governance bodies have approved a double materiality assessment, but then they fall short from explaining accurately whether and in which ways governance bodies have been involved in all the other steps of addressing sustainability issues. For example, how the measures that have been adopted, if they have been adopted to address material impacts, actually are, or at the same time, what the results of due diligence processes are. So we see that the level of oversight and even involvement in managing sustainability issues within the company is actually falling short, and it's lacking. And again, yes, one issue is that companies may confuse it with a general governance. So they will talk a lot about, for example, money laundering and management and the composition of the management, which, by the way, is information that is obviously required, but still the focus is a bit shifted towards how do we address, how do we really consider sustainability issues that we have found as material in our records within the business strategy, which is then ultimately what the CSRD reporting exercise aims to.
Yes, so a very, very clear message to boards and board members listening now. You're looking at the processes, but you're not looking at the implementation of the findings that result from them. So that's your challenge for next year. And the last of the four big themes is GHG emissions. Louis, to me, because it's now so many years since the GHG protocol, I would expect companies to be good at this. Are they?
They are completely. It became a standard practice to disclose on GHG emissions. So yeah, ESRS follows GHG protocol, and to that extent, we can see like almost all companies are disclosing the scope 1 and 2. I think 99% to be precise. Only one doesn't disclose it because they don't consider them as material. So scope 1 and 2 are standard practice. Scope 3 is nearly the same. We have 96% of companies disclosing their scope 3. I would say we still have some limitations on scope 3. First one is the challenge of the boundaries of scope 3. It's really hard sometimes to company to know until when to assess the scope 3 emissions. Do they take into account the subsidiaries? It's a bit challenging for them. And the other challenge would be like the scope 3 categories, as ESRS is requiring companies to disclose their relevant scope 3 categories. And this category might change depending if you're a textile company or financial institutions. And we we see that there is a gap between companies disclosing their scope 3 and then companies actually disclosing their relevant scope 3 categories. Not all companies disclosing scope 3 are making available data on all relevant categories for them. But there is clearly a trend on making it a standard. It's more and more a common practice, and I'm quite sure that in the following years it will continue to rise. So yeah, to answer your question, they are quite good at it, almost perfect on scope 1 and 2, and still some minor limitation on scope 3.
Let's broaden it out to the big findings from this. One of your big conclusions is that CSRD has actually improved the reporting. Just justify that.
Yes, I mean, in terms of reporting, it's clear that I think it's important to also note that reporting is better because we can follow the same template and the same structure, which enhance comparability of the data. And it's something that kind of struck me during the research after analyzing many reports. At the beginning, I didn't really notice it, but after assessing 20 or 30 reports, you start to notice it. The comparability of data is super good, actually, compared to last year or pre-CSRD times. The quality of the data is also enhanced. And yeah, I think this is the main victory, if I can call it like this, of CSRD, is to enhance the quality and comparability of data. Even for first timers, actually, I would say ESRS is a really good train to jump in if you are new to sustainability reporting. because it's simply great for comparability, structure. You have one consolidated report for every information. So yeah, I think it completely increases the completeness of the data, its quality, and its comparability. That's the main victory, I would say, of ESRS that I noticed.
And that comparability point, Lorena, everyone in these debates has been saying that the reports aren't comparable enough. The investors in particular have wanted comparability, and they haven't had it. You've actually had to sit there reading these reports and comparing them. Are they generally more comparable, and why?
Well, essentially because of what we were saying before, the ESRS are like standards. So what they provide is a standardization. The contents that need to feed into the annual reports are already spelled out, as well as there is like actual guidance on what those contents should be. Basically, what companies find is a template that is ready to follow, and this then helps us to easily find information, especially because these annual reports are actually very, very long. So when we already know that there is like a sustainability report, and the sustainability report for all companies has the same structures, the same contents, it's really just easy to go through the index and find the information that is relevant and that we most want.
And Louis, you said in your previous answer about ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. Most of our audience will know this, but they are separate from the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, but are mandated by it. What did you find specifically about how well the companies understood and applied the ESRS?
There is a point of quality and there is a point of structure. In terms of structure, you know that the report will follow the same logic. You know where to find the information on governance. You know where to find information on the DMA process, the materiality assessment. You know where to find the information on GHG emission scope 3 and relevant categories. And it's going to be the same template across all different reports. And then I think just in terms of quality of information and knowing your impacts and risk better, for companies, it's really important to do this. It's a strategic, let's say, advantage to know where your impacts are and where the risks come from. And the ESRS put at the core of its structure the DMA, the double materiality assessment, which will enable companies to have a clear view on what their impact on the environment are, and at the same time, what they can expect as risk, potential and factual risk coming from the environment. And I see it as like double value, like it's a great value for companies as a strategic insight, like they can clearly like draw their strategy from this double materiality assessment. And at the same time, when we assess the report, we were not part of the company. We are completely external to it. We are external readers. And we can just clearly have a better picture of the company, its activities, its impact, thanks to the ESRS templates. And for the reader, it's a great value. And for the company, it helps as well to identify like some key information on your strategy.
Here, some of the listeners saying to us, this is an over rosy presentation. You know, companies have found this very challenging. So what has been the biggest challenge for companies that you can see from these reports?
Oh yes, if I can jump in, yes, obviously they find it challenging, and we also all see the challenges. For example, we see the challenges in mapping the value chain, in providing actual meaningful and company-specific information. We see the challenging in addressing biodiversity, in identifying the nature dependencies, even the description of the IROs. Yes, now it's more and more present, but most of the time we have like an aggregation of this information, which means that the impact is not described at the most granular level, but only at a more general level, which basically means that the insight that the company has on its own material impacts, risks, and opportunities is a bit broader and should be improved. So yes, challenges are there, and we can see that in the quality of the of the reporting, where overall we can find an amazing structure, we can find this comparability and this readability, but then we fall short from actually finding what is the real important information that should be there. And I think that here the issue is also one of miscomprehension or underappreciation on the company's side of the value of this reporting. Reporting and CSRD are, yes, about transparency, obviously, and they serve to orient other potential investors and everybody that could be actually interested in sustainability information, but it is also a strategic tool for the company itself. If you are forced or obliged to report on sustainability issues, to carry out a double materiality, it means that you are deep screening your own business activities and that you are locating what are your potential risks in the future in front of climate change, of environmental disaster, or even human rights issues and violations, especially in the value chain, especially in high-risk geographies.
We're in the last part of the podcast now, so some quicker questions. Let's just best in class. Which sector recorded the best quality reporting?
Hard to say in terms of best sectors. We didn't really target this type of information, but we know that in some sector there are something that can be done better if it can answer as well the question. For instance, in terms of CTP's climate transition plan in the financial sectors, we've seen some patterns that might be better in the upcoming years, hopefully. But for instance, ESRS prioritize absolute emission reduction targets, while financial institutions really must rely on intensity targets, which sometimes do not really translate in real world reduction of emission. And at the same time, we also see that for financial institutions in their CTP, let's say most of the time they don't really target some sector specifically. Some sectors need a specific phase out or let's say adapt climate transition plan, and it's not always the case. So we have this focus on CTP for financial institutions. And then I don't think we've seen any sector which was particularly rising from the others in terms of good practices.
I think the EFRAG State of Play report said the financial, and they also looked to the first wave CSRD reports, that the financial sector probably scored best. So at least that's consistent. What about all of those topics in ESRS? Which were the best topics and maybe the worst topics in terms of the quality of reporting?
I would say that the worst topic is probably governance, not necessarily because it is hard to report on governance, but just because it is highly underwhelming, because involvement of management bodies into sustainability issues management should be like very easy to report on and should be very easy to implement, because it's about like the ordinary business model and how you try to create governance, and it's about like the business culture in the company. So having in that specific topic that poor quality of information is really disappointing. The best one, I think, that could nonetheless, and despite all the caveats, be climate transition plans and GHG, just because companies have been reporting on this a bit longer, so they're a bit more acquainted to it, even though progress is still to be made.
And the Data Moran, they did a study of the first wave. Now I've been comparing the different reports. They said biodiversity, water, and affected communities were the least well reported. Would you concur with that?
Yes, biodiversity especially is a very, very challenging for companies. They do not really know how to address it, how to measure biodiversity impacts, how to screen the sites. So the information most of the time is very generic. It's not site specific. There is underreporting regarding negative effects stemming from, for example, sites located or near biodiversity sensitive areas. On the other hand, though, we found that quite a few companies are still disclosing that they are making progress or they are leading pilot projects or they are actually putting on processes to better screen the biodiversity impacts, to better account for nature dependencies. So in a way, it's an issue of maturity of the market regarding reporting on biodiversity, which means that potentially in the following years of reporting, improvements will be there because companies are at least claiming to adequate to this.
And Louis, which country is best, or which region is best? This was every single EU member state was covered with that focus on Eastern Europe, but spread throughout the continent. Who comes out best and why?
Who's the best in class? Well, we did, as you said in the research, we had like a majority of CEE companies. So we assessed, of course, the CEE against the Western European companies at the end of the research. And it turned out that in GHG and CTP, less Polish and CEE companies have GHG reduction targets than Western companies. And I think it's quite a huge gap. It might be 54% of Central and Eastern European companies having reduction target compared to 95 of Western companies. So it's quite a big gap. We also have more ambitious commitments in Western European companies, such as net zero. But on the other hand, we have more clarity and more transparency on the methodology for GHG assessments in CEE countries and CEE companies, which is a bit paradoxal, but that's a thing. And if I also might say something, it's on Nordics countries because we also assessed the Nordics countries' patterns against the Western European one. And here we can say that Nordics have actually a tendency to stronger commitments on a climate transition plan and on GHG reduction. 90% of Nordics countries and Nordics companies have climate reduction targets. And we also saw that there is a higher percentage of Nordics companies disclosing on biodiversity sites located near endangered areas. So it seems that Nordics companies are a bit in advance in terms of GHG, in terms of CTP, and also in terms of maybe biodiversity screening. And on the other hand, we can see that, okay, many CEE companies are maybe first timers or not that don't have the same history in sustainability, in corporate sustainability as Western companies. It shows a bit, but at the same time, I think, ESRS is a perfect train for them to jump in because it will quickly achieve a really standard level across all companies.
And I liked the fact that the Polish-based companies actually stood tall amongst all of the EU companies. So for people who just want to make generalizations about Eastern Europe, that rather proves that wrong. One final question to each of you. There are a set of recommendations both to policymakers and to businesses from the report. I'm going to ask you to pick one from each, your best recommendation. So for the policymakers first, don't mind which of you answers. What's your one best recommendation to policymakers from this study?
Yeah, for me, it will be more on sector-specific guidance. ESRS, we know they were supposed to be like sector-specific standards as well, which are on hold at the moment. But I think there is a need for sector-specific guidance. As Lorena said, on biodiversity, for instance, we have a lot of companies actually saying biodiversity is material to them. But then when it comes to more detailed assessments, listing the sites near biodiversity and endangered area, it's more complicated. There are less tools, less guidance, and especially as well on value chain risk, value chain workers, and even as well on scope 3 GHG emission. Like we need more guidance on what needs to be included, what are the basically categories to be included.
Similarly, for the businesses listening, one recommendation that comes from the report.
For the businesses, it will be like really about the integration of due diligence with double materiality. It really is a huge assist, and it will notably improve the quality of double materiality assessment in itself, while at the same time actually being a simplification of the reporting work that they have to do already.
It's been a complete pleasure speaking with you both in this podcast We've heard that on climate transition plans, there's a very impressive application of those in the report, showing that companies really are identifying their pathways towards decarbonisation. We've heard that there's been a very, very high level of application of double materiality assessment, but perhaps some of it too much structured around the topics in ESRS rather than entity-specific information. That's the challenge for next year. We've heard that governance is well represented, but tends to be about process rather than implementation. And we've heard that GHG emissions reporting is very widespread, very accurate, including scope 3. Overall, this research has shown that CSRD has led to an increase in both the quality of sustainability reporting by business, but also the comparability, and these good readers could attest to that from their own personal experience. Biodiversity, perhaps one of the biggest challenges, and in terms of recommendations, we've heard there may not be sector-specific standards, but there should be sector-specific guidance. Says this report, and for companies, integrate due diligence processes with your double materiality assessment is a top tip. And I've even named some companies who are doing it well that you can copy. Louis has said that from all of this research, CSRD reporting is the train to jump onto if you're a business. We have come to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much to Lorena Bisignano and to Louis Establet for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Frankly Speaking, the Frank Bold podcast on responsible business. Find out more about Frank Bold's Responsible Companies section on our website, and please give us your feedback on our LinkedIn page or by commenting via your podcast provider, where we hope you will share the conversation and give this podcast a 5-star rating. And remember, you can watch us on our YouTube channel too. It's been a bit interrupted today, and apologies to our viewers for that. Our next podcast will look at the issue of product level sustainability disclosure by companies, a different approach. Thank you again to Louis and to Lorena, and to all of you for listening. Do join us next time, and goodbye.